My husband's job requires him to be away from home for days at a time, while I work a 9-to-5 job. Until recently, my parents were taking care of Mila while we were at work, but I felt guilty about burdening them as they're getting older. My husband's sister, Julia, 22F, lived nearby and worked part-time to cover her rent and expenses. I thought it might be a good solution to ask Julia to move in with us. She could help with Mila, and in return, she wouldn't have to worry about rent anymore. I discussed this with my husband, and he agreed it was a good idea. My husband talked to Julia about our proposal. At first she declined, but the next evening she called to say she had changed her mind and was willing to move in. We were happy about this arrangement and thought it would work out well for everyone. Julia moved in a few days later, and things seemed to be going smoothly at first. However, after about a week, I started noticing that Mila was acting differently. She seemed hesitant to be around Julia and would often cling to me when Julia was in the room. This was unusual behavior for Mila, who is typically a friendly and outgoing child. I was concerned but didn't want to jump to conclusions. I decided to keep a closer eye on the situation and see if I could figure out what was going on. One day, when my husband was away and Julia had gone out, I sat down with Mila to talk. I asked her gently if everything was okay, and if there was any reason she didn't want to be around Aunt Julia. What Mila told me shocked and horrified me. She said that as soon as I left for work, Julia would put her in her playroom and lock the door from the outside, leaving her alone for hours at a time. Mila said she would cry and call for Julia, but Julia wouldn't come back until just before I was due to return from work. She would give her something to eat and check on her from time to time, but she would keep her locked in the playroom, giving excuses like she is just a child and should stay in her playroom surrounded by her toys. I'm devastated and angry. I can't believe Julia would do something like this to a 4-year-old child. I want to address this immediately, but I'm not sure how to proceed. Part of me wants to confront Julia directly and demand an explanation. Another part of me thinks I should set up a hidden camera to catch her in the act before I say anything. I'm also considering coming home early from work one day without telling Julia, to see if I can catch her neglecting Mila. But I'm worried about what I might find, and how it might affect Mila if she really is being locked up all day. I haven't told my husband yet because I want to be sure before I make such a serious accusation against his sister. But keeping this from him is eating me up inside. I'm torn about what to do next. Should I confront Julia directly? Should I try to gather more evidence first? Should I tell my husband immediately, even though I only have Mila's word to go on? Or should I find a way to stay home for a few days to observe what's happening myself? I'm also worried about the long-term implications. If this is true, I don't think I can ever trust Julia with Mila again. But kicking her out would mean she has nowhere to go, and it could cause a huge rift in the family. On the other hand, if I'm wrong and Julia isn't doing this, I could be damaging my relationship with her for no reason. Maybe Mila misunderstood something or is making it up for attention. But why would she suddenly start acting so afraid of Julia if nothing was wrong? I want to protect my daughter, but I also don't want to accuse Julia of something so serious without being absolutely sure. I'm scared of making the wrong decision and either putting Mila at further risk or unfairly accusing Julia. How should I confront my sister-in-law about this? I'm desperate for advice on how to handle this situation. Update first, I want to thank everyone for their advice on my previous post. After much consideration, I decided to install nanny cams in the common areas of our house to keep an eye on Julia and Mila. I didn't tell anyone about this, not even my husband or Mila. I felt guilty about the secrecy, but I needed to know the truth about what was happening when I wasn't home. The day after I installed the cameras, I pretended to leave for work as usual. Instead, I drove to a nearby mall and settled in at a coffee shop where I could monitor the camera feed on my phone. My heart was racing as I watched the live footage, hoping I was wrong about my suspicions. Unfortunately, my worst fears were confirmed. Shortly after I left, I saw Julia lead Mila to her playroom. She then closed the door and used a small key to lock it from the outside. I felt sick to my stomach watching this. Julia then went to the living room, sat on the couch, and started scrolling through her phone, completely ignoring Mila's calls and cries. I was about to rush home when something even more shocking happened. Julia got up and went to the kitchen's back door. She opened it and let in a hooded man. When he took off his hood, I froze in disbelief. It was Derek, my abusive ex-boyfriend. Seeing Derek brought back a flood of painful memories. We had dated for 2 years when I was in my mid-20s. At first he was charming and attentive, but his true nature soon emerged. It started with small things, criticizing my clothes, getting jealous when I spent time with friends. Then it escalated to controlling behavior, constant put-downs, and eventually physical abuse. The first time he hit me, he apologized profusely and swore it would never happen again. I believed him, thinking it was a one-time mistake. But the abuse only got worse. He would fly into rages over minor things, throwing objects and shoving me. He isolated me from my friends and family, making me feel like he was all I had. I lived in constant fear, walking on eggshells to avoid triggering his anger. The emotional toll was even worse than the physical abuse. He made me doubt myself.